He thought it was just a small gift to cheer up his little girl, but inside that dusty clock was a secret his family had been denied for generations. A key, a letter, and a trail of clues that would lead straight to a fortune stolen through lies and intimidation. But as soon as hope appears, powerful forces move to crush it because the people who took it aren't ready to give it back. A hidden history is about to explode into the present. Lives will change, and a father will have to decide how far will he go to reclaim what's his when the truth could cost him everything. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. Through the thin walls of the trailer, the early morning birdsong mixed with the rumble of passing trucks on the nearby highway. Ethan Cole stood at his small kitchen counter, still wearing his Navy delivery uniform from the night shift. Dark circles shadowed his eyes as he sorted through a stack of wrinkled envelopes, his weathered hands moving methodically through the pile. Maya sat at their tiny fold-out table, spooning cereal from a chip bowl. Her schoolbooks were already packed neatly in her backpack, waiting by the door. The morning sun streaming through the window caught the natural highlights in her dark hair, which she'd carefully braided herself. "Did you finish your math homework?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice steady as he noticed the red envelope mixed in with the bills. "Yep," Mrs. Henderson said, "I'm getting better at fractions." Maya smiled, revealing a gap where her front tooth had recently fallen out. "Want to see?" "Sure thing, sweetheart. Just." Ethan's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the electric bill marked "Final Notice" in bold red letters. The amount due made his stomach clench. Even with all his overtime hours, they were falling behind. Maya's chair scraped against the linoleum as she stood to put her bowl in the sink. She noticed her father's tense shoulders, the way his jaw tightened as he read the paper in his hands. "Dad, is everything okay?" Ethan quickly folded the notice and stuffed it in his pocket. "Everything's fine, kiddo. Just boring grown-up stuff." He forced a smile, but Maya's perceptive brown eyes studied his face. "You've got that worried look again," she said quietly, fidgeting with the hem of her worn but clean t-shirt. "Like when we had to leave the apartment." Ethan's heart ached. At 9 years old, Maya was too young to shoulder adult concerns, but too observant to miss them entirely. He crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps and pulled her into a hug. "Hey now, don't you worry about any of that. Let's get you to school." The drive to Maya's elementary school was quiet at first. Their old sedan rattled slightly at stops, and Ethan made a mental note to check the brakes soon. Maya watched the familiar houses and shops pass by, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack in her lap. "Dad?" she finally asked, her voice small. "Are we going to have to move again?" Ethan gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles whitening. The question hit him like a physical blow. "Maya, honey." He paused at a red light and turned to look at her properly. "I promise you I'm going to figure something out. Whatever happens, we'll face it together, okay?" Maya nodded, but her eyes remained worried. "I like my school," she said softly. "And Mrs. Henderson. And the piano in the music room." "I know you do, sweetheart." Ethan's throat felt tight. He pulled up to the school drop-off zone and put the car in park. "You just focus on having a good day at school. Can you do that for me?" Maya's smile returned, though smaller than usual. "Okay, Dad." She leaned over to give him a quick hug. "Love you. Love you too, kiddo. So much." Ethan watched until she disappeared through the school's front doors, then sat in the car for a long moment, his head resting against the steering wheel. The final notice burned in his pocket like a hot coal. His shift at the delivery company wouldn't start for several hours, and his mind raced with calculations and possibilities. The day passed in a blur of delivery stops and careful driving. As his shift ended, Ethan found himself turning onto Main Street instead of heading straight home. The small shops were starting to close for the day, their windows growing dark one by one. He had exactly $23 in his wallet, money he'd been saving for gas, but something in him needed to bring Maya even a small bright spot today. Amara's Treasures still had its lights on. The thrift shop's window displayed a cheerful jumble of vintage items and second-hand finds. A bell chimed softly as Ethan pushed open the door, and Maya's eyes widened at the sight of all the interesting objects crowding the shelves. "Can I look around?" she asked, already drawn to a display of old books and trinkets. "Sure, honey, but remember, we're just getting something small today." The shop's owner, Amara Brooks, looked up from her counter with a warm smile. She wore a colorful headscarf and had reading glasses perched on top of her head. "Welcome. Let me know if you need help finding anything specific." Ethan nodded gratefully, following Maya as she explored the narrow aisles. She moved carefully, treating each item with respect as she examined old teacups, leather-bound books, and delicate figurines. Then she stopped suddenly, her attention caught by something on a bottom shelf. "Dad, look at this!" She pointed to a dusty mantel clock, its wooden case scratched but still beautiful beneath the wear. A handwritten tag hung from its handle. "Broken, too." Maya pressed her face against the glass display case, her breath fogging up the surface as she studied the old mantel clock. Though covered in a thick layer of dust, its wooden case still held a warm, rich color underneath. The brass fixtures, while tarnished, hinted at former elegance. "Can we get it, Dad? Please?" Maya's eyes sparkled with hope as she turned to Ethan. "It looks just like the one in that movie we watched, the one with the magical house." Ethan ran his fingers through his hair, calculating numbers in his head. Even $2 meant dipping into gas money for his delivery runs. But the way Maya's face lit up, he hadn't seen that expression in weeks. Amara Brooks stepped around the counter, her bangles jingling softly as she moved. She wore a bright purple cardigan that seemed to warm the whole shop. "That old thing? Been sitting here gathering dust for ages." She picked up the clock carefully, turning it over in her experienced hands. "Hasn't ticked in decades, I'd bet. Previous owner said they could never get it working." "I like it better than a working one," Maya declared. "It's mysterious. Maybe it's waiting for the right person to fix it." Amara's eyes crinkled with amusement. She glanced at Ethan, noting his hesitation. "Tell you what, sweetheart, since you see such potential in it, I'll make it an even $2. No tax." "Dad?" Maya clasped her hands together. "I promise I'll dust it every day. And when I practice piano, it can keep time for me, even if it doesn't work." Ethan felt a familiar ache in his chest, the one that came whenever Maya tried to make things easier for him. She never asked for new clothes or toys like other kids her age. Just this one small thing that made her eyes shine. "Okay, honey." He pulled 2 wrinkled dollar bills from his wallet. "But remember, it's just for decoration." Amara wrapped the clock carefully in brown paper, tying it with twine. "Good eye, Maya. Sometimes the best treasures are the ones others overlook." Back home in their trailer, Ethan cleared a space on the kitchen table. Maya unwrapped the clock like it was made of gold, placing it in the center where sunlight from the window fell across its face. The hands were frozen at 3:47. "I'm going to practice piano at Ms. Ruth's house," Maya announced. "When I come back, can we try to fix it?" "We'll see, sweetie. Be home before dark, okay?" After Maya left, Ethan sat heavily in a kitchen chair. The shut-off notice seemed to burn in his pocket. He reached for the clock, thinking he could at least clean it up for her. The wood felt smooth under his calloused hands as he wiped away decades of dust with an old t-shirt. The brass numerals began to shine through, elegant against the dark wood. As he turned it to clean the back, the clock slipped in his grip. His heart jumped as it fell, but instead of crashing, it landed with a soft thud on the carpet. The back panel had popped loose, revealing a hidden compartment. 3 items spilled out. A small brass key, no bigger than his pinky, a folded, yellowed paper that looked like some kind of bank certificate dated 1968, and an envelope, sealed but crumbling with age. With trembling fingers, Ethan picked up the envelope. The paper was delicate, threatening to tear at the slightest touch. He carefully worked it open and pulled out a single sheet of paper covered in elegant handwriting he hadn't seen in over 20 years. His breath caught as he read the signature at the bottom. Rosemary Hale. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Rosemary Hale, his grandmother, the woman who used to play hymns on the piano while he sat beside her as a little boy, who always smelled like lavender and kept cookies in a jar shaped like a clock, who disappeared from his life so suddenly when he was 10, leaving behind only fragments of stories his mother would never fully explain. Ethan spread the items on the table, handling them as if they might dissolve into dust. The bank certificate's formal text was faded but clear enough to read. The brass key gleamed in the afternoon light, its teeth forming an unusual pattern he'd never seen before. His eyes kept returning to the letter, to that familiar signature. Why had his grandmother hidden these things in an old clock? What had happened in 1968 that made her seal away these documents? He remembered his mother's tight expression whenever anyone mentioned Grandma Rosemary, the way she'd changed the subject if he asked too many questions. The clock sat silent on the table, its face revealing nothing. But now Ethan understood. It had been keeping secrets all along, waiting decades for someone to discover what Rosemary Hale had hidden away. His hand shook slightly as he picked up the letter again, knowing that whatever mystery his grandmother had locked away in this $2 clock was about to change everything. Early morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Wally Finch's clock shop, casting long shadows across the weathered wooden floor. The steady tick-tock of dozens of timepieces filled the air, creating a rhythmic symphony that had been the backdrop of Wally's life for over 5 decades. Ethan stood at the counter, the broken mantel clock cradled carefully in his arms. The brass key and documents were safely tucked in his jacket pocket. A small bell above the door had announced his entrance, but the old clockmaker took his time emerging from the back room. "We're not open yet," Wally called out gruffly, his stooped figure appearing from behind a shelf of grandfather clocks. His weathered hands were stained with clock oil, and wire-rimmed glasses sat perched on his nose. "Mr. Finch," Ethan said politely, "I know it's early, but I was hoping you could take a look at this clock before my shift starts." He set the timepiece gently on the counter. Wally's expression remained stern as he approached, but his eyes lit up the moment they fell on the clock. His callous fingers traced the wooden edges with surprising tenderness. "Where did you get this?" "Amara's thrift shop. My daughter picked it out." The old clockmaker's hands moved with practiced precision as he examined the case. "This is fine work. German-made. Probably late 1940s. He reached for a small screwdriver from his work apron. "Don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." Ethan watched as Wally carefully opened the clock's face, revealing the intricate gears within. The old man's movements were methodical, each motion born from thousands of similar repairs over the years. "The mechanism's not too badly worn," Wally muttered, more to himself than to Ethan. "Just needs a good cleaning, and—" His voice trailed off as he noticed something unusual about the base. "What is it?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. Wally adjusted his glasses. "The bottom plate's been modified, not original to the piece." His fingers found a nearly invisible seam, and with a gentle press, a hidden compartment clicked open. Ethan's breath caught as Wally pulled out a carefully folded piece of paper. It was a map, the edges yellow with age, showing downtown streets as they'd been laid out decades ago. A red X marked what appeared to be an old bank building. The clockmaker's hands trembled slightly as he stared at the map. "I remember this clock," he said quietly, his gruff demeanor softening. "Your grandmother brought it to me. Must have been 68 or 69. You knew my grandmother, Rosemary Hale?" Wally nodded slowly, his eyes distant with memory. "She came in early one morning, just like you did today. The clock needed minor repairs, but that wasn't why she was here." He set the map down carefully. "It was right after those vandals attacked her home." "Vandals?" Ethan's stomach tightened. "Burned a cross on her lawn," Wally said, his voice heavy with old anger. "Terrible business. Town was different back then. Lot of good people stayed quiet when they shouldn't have." He paused, cleaning his glasses with the edge of his apron. "Your grandmother, though, she had steel in her spine. Came in here with her head held high, asked me to check the clock's mechanism." The old clockmaker began working as he spoke, his hands moving surely among the gears. "I remember what she said, clear as day. I'm not hiding anymore, Wally. I'm preserving." Didn't understand what she meant back then. He looked up at Ethan. "Maybe I didn't want to understand." The steady tick-tock of the surrounding clocks filled the silence between them. Wally's skilled fingers made quick work of the repairs, cleaning and adjusting until the mechanism moved smoothly once again. "There," he said finally, closing the clock's face. The pendulum swung with a steady rhythm, and the hands began their journey around the dial. "Good as new." Ethan reached for his wallet, but Wally waved him off. "No charge," he said firmly. "Not for Rosemary's grandson." He wrapped the clock carefully in a soft cloth, handling it with reverence. "Whatever your grandmother preserved in this clock, whatever she was protecting, it must have been important." He handed the timepiece back to Ethan along with the map. "Follow where it leads." The morning sun had climbed higher, casting new patterns through the shop's windows. The chorus of ticking clocks seemed to grow louder as Ethan cradled his grandmother's clock, the hidden map a whispered promise of answers to questions he hadn't known to ask. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of First National Bank's marble lobby. Maya's small hand clutched Ethan's as they walked across the polished floor, their footsteps echoing in the grand space. The building still held traces of its original 1920s grandeur, though modern computers and branded signs now decorated the teller windows. Ethan approached the information desk, his heart thumping. "I have an appointment with Nora Whitman," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The receptionist directed them to a small office where a woman in her early 40s sat behind a neat desk. Nora Whitman stood to greet them, her navy blazer crisp and professional, but her smile warm and genuine. "Mr. Cole, please come in." She gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "And this must be Maya." Maya gave a shy wave as they settled into their seats. Ethan placed the brass key on Nora's desk, along with the documents they'd found in the clock. "This is quite unusual," Nora said, examining the key's aged brass surface. "Safe deposit box keys typically have numbers engraved on them. This one." She turned it over carefully. "This appears to be from our original vault system." "Can we still use it?" Maya asked, leaning forward in her chair. "We maintain all our original boxes," Nora explained. "Some families have held them for generations. Let me check our records." Her fingers moved efficiently across her keyboard. A deep voice from the doorway made them all look up. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear." Deacon Isaiah Grant stood there, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. His silver hair caught the afternoon light, and his kind eyes crinkled at the corners. "I was just finishing some church business with the branch manager." "Deacon Isaiah," Nora smiled, "please join us. Mr. Cole here has discovered what appears to be an old safe deposit key." The deacon stepped into the office, recognition dawning on his face as he looked at Ethan. "Cole, any relation to Rosemary Hale?" Ethan nodded. "She was my grandmother." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Isaiah said softly, taking a seat. "I knew Rosemary well. She was a pillar of our community." Nora's computer chimed. "I found something. Box 317, original vault section." She stood, smoothing her skirt. "Would you like to see what's inside?" They followed her through a series of secure doors, each requiring different keys and codes. Maya stayed close to Ethan, her eyes wide as they entered the vault area. The modern safety deposit boxes gleamed under fluorescent lights, but Nora led them to a separate section where older brass boxes lined the walls. "Here we are." Nora located box 317. The key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting all these years for this moment. With Nora's master key added, the box opened with a solid click. Inside lay a stack of carefully preserved documents, protected by a waxy paper wrapper that had yellowed with age. Nora carried the box to a private viewing room, where they could examine the contents properly. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped the papers. The first document was a deed, the elegant typescript still clear after all these years. Property deed for lots 12 through 15, Riverside Avenue. "Those were prime lots," Isaiah said quietly, leaning forward, "right along the river before they rezoned everything in the 70s. Next came a bundle of stock certificates, tied with faded blue ribbon. Nora examined them professionally. These appear to be original shares in several local companies. Some of these businesses are still operating, though they've merged or changed names. Maya watched intently as her father revealed more documents, letters, insurance policies, and photographs of houses that must have once stood on Riverside Avenue. One photo showed a younger Rosemary standing proudly in front of a neat brick building. "That was her dress shop," Isaiah said, pointing to the photograph. "Built it from nothing, that woman did. Had an eye for fashion and a head for business." His voice grew softer. "Then came the rezoning, the R-plat, they called it. Suddenly, all these properties owned by colored folks just disappeared from the records." Nora frowned, sorting through more papers. "These documents show clear ownership. How could they just disappear?" "Things had ways of disappearing back then," Isaiah said. He opened his portfolio and pulled out some church records. "But we kept our own archives. Every property, every business owned by our congregation members, we documented it all." He laid out papers showing property maps, newspaper clippings, and church bulletins. "See here, 1,968 Rosemary Hale's Riverside properties listed in our business directory. 1,971. Notice about the rezoning meetings. 1,973. The properties are gone, listed under new ownership after the replat." Maya tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Dad, what does all this mean?" Ethan stared at the documents spread across the table, proof of his grandmother's life's work, of what had been taken, of what should have been passed down through the years. "It means your great-grandmother was very brave and very smart," he said carefully. She hid these papers to keep them safe, hoping somebody would find them someday. Nora gathered the documents carefully. Mr. Cole, these records are significant. They provide clear evidence of your grandmother's property ownership prior to the rezoning. I'll need to bring this to the attention of our legal department and the trust committee. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they sat in silence, the weight of history settling around them. Isaiah placed a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Rosemary always said the truth would come out someday. She kept faith. They left the bank into the late afternoon sunshine, Maya skipping ahead while Ethan walked slowly, his mind still processing everything they'd discovered. His grandmother's hidden legacy, preserved in a $2 clock, might change everything. The familiar weight of worry in his chest had lifted slightly, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Maya turned back to him, her face bright with excitement. "Dad, are you okay?" Ethan looked at his daughter, seeing Rosemary's determination in her eyes. They walked together in stunned silence, but for the first time in months, hope bloomed in his heart like a flower reaching for the sun. The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the trailer park as Ethan sat on his weathered front steps. Maya was inside practicing piano on her small electronic keyboard, a yard sale find from last summer. The gentle melody of her favorite hymn drifted through the screen door, bringing a moment of peace to his troubled thoughts. His cell phone buzzed in his pocket. An unknown local number flashed on the screen. "Hello?" Ethan answered, keeping his voice low so Maya wouldn't hear. "Mr. Cole?" The voice was smooth, cultured. "This is Marshall Keene. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening." Ethan's spine stiffened. Everyone in town knew the Keene name. Their real estate signs dotted every developing corner of the county. "No interruption," he said carefully. "Good, good." Keene's tone was friendly, but something about it made Ethan's skin prickle. "Word travels fast in small towns, doesn't it? I heard about your interesting discovery at First National the other day." Inside, Maya hit a wrong note, paused, and started the measure again. Ethan watched a pair of cardinals hop across his small patch of lawn. "News to me that it was public information." "Oh, you know how it is. When something involves historical property records, certain parties need to be notified." Keene chuckled, but there was no warmth in it. "Actually, that's why I'm calling. I believe we might be able to help each other out." "How's that?" Ethan asked, his guard up. "Those old riverside lots, they're part of a larger development now. Technically, they're under management of Keene Properties." The man's voice took on a practiced, reasonable tone. "Now, I understand you may have found some historical documents, but pursuing legal ownership could be, well, quite expensive and exhausting." Ethan's free hand clenched into a fist. He forced it to relax. "Those lots belonged to my grandmother." "Ah, yes, Rosemary Hale. Unfortunate business, all that confusion back then. But you have to understand, Mr. Cole, property law is complex. Years of back taxes, title searches, proving continuous lineage. It can drain a man's resources." Keene paused meaningfully. "Resources that might be better spent on more immediate needs?" The implication hung in the air like smoke. Through the door, Maya's music continued, sweet and oblivious. "I'm prepared to offer you a settlement," Keene continued. "A generous one, considering the circumstances. Enough to get you and your daughter into a better situation, maybe even a small house in a nice neighborhood." Ethan's throat felt tight. "And in return, you'd sign a quitclaim deed, relinquishing any historical interest in the properties. Simple, clean, everyone wins." Keene's voice softened. "Look, I'm trying to help here. Legal battles are messy. They require stable housing, reliable income, the kind of stability that social services likes to see in custody situations." The threat, though veiled, landed like a punch to the gut. Ethan stood up, his legs shaking slightly. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Keene?" "Threatening? Not at all." Keene sounded almost hurt. "I'm simply pointing out realities. Single parents have it tough enough without taking on impossible fights. Think about what's best for your daughter." Maya's music stopped. Ethan heard her footsteps approaching the screen door and quickly walked to the edge of his small porch. "I'll need time to think about it," he said, keeping his voice level. Of course, but don't think too long. These situations can get complicated quickly." The fake warmth was back in Keene's voice. "I'll have my assistant send over the settlement papers, just in case." A sleek black SUV pulled into the trailer park's gravel drive, its tinted windows reflecting the sunset. Ethan hadn't even noticed it waiting there. The vehicle crawled past his trailer, and though he couldn't see through the dark glass, he felt eyes on him. "Have a good evening, Mr. Cole. Give my best to Maya." The line went dead. Ethan stood frozen, watching as the SUV made a slow turn and glided away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. His phone felt heavy in his hand, Keen's words echoing in his mind. The man hadn't just threatened Ethan's claim to the property. He'd threatened everything. The screen door creaked open behind him. "Dad? Who was that?" Ethan quickly pocketed his phone and turned to face Maya, forcing a smile. "Just a work call, sweetheart. That piece you were playing sounded really good." Maya beamed, but then her expression turned serious. "Are you okay? You look weird." "I'm fine." Ethan reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "Just tired from work. How about we heat up those leftovers from Miss Ruth?" As they headed inside, Ethan cast one last look at the empty road where Keen's SUV had disappeared. The sunset had faded to purple, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. His grandmother's words from the letter echoed in his mind. "Held safe for our children, once it is safe for our name." He understood now why she'd hidden everything in that clock. Some things hadn't changed as much as people like to pretend. But Rosemary hadn't backed down, and neither would he, no matter what Keen threatened. The screen door banged shut behind them, and Ethan locked it tight, double-checking the deadbolt before following Maya to the kitchen. The aroma of fresh coffee and Ruth Delgado's famous apple pie filled the church hall that Saturday morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced above the quilting frames where several women worked with practiced hands. The steady click of needles and soft murmur of conversation created a comfortable atmosphere that made the spacious room feel cozy. Ruth's face lit up when she spotted Ethan and Maya hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Well, don't just stand there like strangers. Come in, come in." She waved them over, her silver hair catching the light. "Ladies, look who's joined us today." Maya skipped ahead, drawn by the colorful fabrics spread across the tables. Ethan followed more slowly, feeling out of place among the circle of women. He'd fought in Afghanistan, drove delivery routes through midnight storms, but somehow this gathering made him more nervous than either. "Ethan Cole, meet the Saturday morning stitchers," Ruth announced, leading him around the room. "Though we do more talking than stitching most days." She winked at Maya, who giggled. "Mrs. Peterson here taught at Willowbin High for 40 years, Ruth said, stopping beside a tiny woman with kind eyes. "She knew your grandmother Rosemary when she played organ for the church." "Oh my, yes." Mrs. Peterson set down her needle. "Such a talented musician, and brave, so brave during those difficult times." She patted the empty chair beside her. "Sit down, young man, there's much you should know." Ruth disappeared into the kitchen and returned with 2 steaming mugs of coffee and a slice of pie. "Maya, honey, there's some paper and colored pencils in that corner if you'd like to draw while we chat." As Maya settled at a small table nearby, Deacon Isaiah entered carrying a worn leather briefcase. "Good morning, everyone. I brought those old records we discussed." He pulled up a chair, nodding at Ethan. "I've been going through the church archives. Found some interesting documents about property transfers in the 60s and 70s. The women gathered closer as Isaiah spread yellowed papers across the quilting frame. "See here? This is a redlining map from 1965. The colored section showed where banks wouldn't give mortgages to certain families." His finger traced along Riverside Avenue. "But your grandmother was clever. She bought her properties before those practices started." "I remember when they tried to push her out," said a white-haired woman Ethan knew as Miss Martha. "First with threats, then with that awful cross burning." But Rosemary held firm. Ethan leaned forward, studying the maps. "So there might be proof she never gave up ownership legally?" "Better than that," Isaiah said. "I found city ledgers showing tax payments under her maiden name even after the neighborhood was redistributed. She kept paying on those lots right up until she passed." "The question is proving it was really her," Ruth added, threading a needle. "And that costs money for lawyers and court fees." "Which brings us to why we really invited you today," Miss Martha said with a smile. "We're planning a proper fundraiser. Everyone in town comes out for Ruth's pies and our quilts." "Oh no, I couldn't ask." Ethan started to protest. "You're not asking, we're offering." Ruth cut him off firmly. "This isn't just about you and Maya anymore. It's about setting right what was wrong, about truth coming to light." The other women nodded in agreement. One pulled out a notebook and began making lists. We'll need posters, and Sarah's boy can share it on that Facebook thing. Betty's church group will help with the baking. The Lions Club has those folding tables we can borrow. Ethan watched in amazement as these elderly women efficiently organized what was shaping up to be a major community event. Maya drifted back over, proudly showing him her drawing of the quilting circle. Isaiah pulled him aside while the planning continued. "Here's a list of folks you should talk to," he said, handing Ethan a carefully written page of names and addresses. Each one has a piece of the story. Mrs. Wilson on Oak Street cleaned house for the bank president back then. Tom Miller's father was the county clerk. Little pieces that might help build the bigger picture. Ruth appeared with a large tin. "Some cookies for you and Maya. Can't have you doing all that visiting on an empty stomach." She pressed it into his hands. "And don't you worry about pride, young man. Sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing we can do." The meeting wound down as noon approached. Maya helped gather scraps of fabric while Ethan tucked Isaiah's list and Ruth's cookies safely away. The women called cheerful goodbyes, already discussing poster designs and pie varieties. Watching Maya skip ahead to their truck, Ethan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning coffee. These virtual strangers were willing to fight for his family's legacy. For the first time since finding the clock, hope felt like more than just a desperate wish. Ruth caught his arm as he turned to leave. "We take care of our own in this town," she said softly. "Always have, even when some folks tried to say who belonged and who didn't. Your grandmother understood that. Now it's time for you to understand it too." Monday morning sunlight filtered through the dusty windows of Amara's treasures, casting warm patches across shelves crammed with vintage items. The familiar bell above the door chimed as Ethan entered, the scent of old books and furniture polish welcoming him. Amara Brooks stood behind the counter, her dark hair tied back with a colorful scarf. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Perfect timing. I was just about to call you." She gestured for him to follow her into the back room, her practical shoes clicking against the worn wooden floor. "I went to the Morrison estate sale yesterday," she explained, weaving between stacks of boxes and furniture waiting to be priced. "And look what I found." She pointed to a mantel clock sitting on her workbench, its mahogany case gleaming under the overhead light. Ethan's breath caught. The clock was nearly identical to the one Maya had chosen, down to the intricate carvings along its base. "Same maker?" "Exactly the same." Amara ran her fingers along the clock's edge. "I recognized the craftsman's mark right away. These weren't mass-produced. Each one was custom-made by the same small workshop in Philadelphia." She picked up a magnifying glass from her desk. "But that's not the exciting part." Ethan moved closer, watching as Amara carefully turned the clock over. Like his grandmother's clock, this one had a false bottom cleverly built into its base. With practiced hands, Amara pressed a hidden catch, and a thin drawer slid out. "I found this inside." She withdrew a yellow document, handling it with the reverence of someone who understood its significance. "It's the original plat map of Riverside Avenue." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he accepted the map. The paper was delicate, but the lines were still clear, showing the original property boundaries from before the controversial replotting of the neighborhood. And there, at the bottom, was his grandmother's elegant signature, alongside two others, Rebecca Wilson and Thomas Green. "These witnesses," he said, voice thick with emotion. "They were neighbors?" Amara nodded. "Rebecca Wilson was my mother's best friend. She used to tell me stories about the strong women who lived on Riverside Avenue. Your grandmother was one of them." She smiled softly. They looked out for each other, kept records when others tried to erase them. Ethan studied the map, hope surging through him. This wasn't just a document. It was proof. Physical evidence that the properties had been legally owned and witnessed, contradicting Marshall Keene's claims about abandoned lots. The timing of finding this, he shook his head in wonder. It seems almost meant to be, Amara finished, her dark eyes warm. Sometimes the right things find us at the right time. She carefully placed the map in a protective sleeve. "I've already called Nora at the bank. She's expecting you." The weight of the map in his hands felt like possibility itself. After years of struggling to stay afloat, of watching Maya's worried eyes when bills arrived, finally there was something solid to hold on to. Something that could change their future. "Amara, I don't know how to thank you." She waved away his words. "Just promise me one thing. When this is all settled, you'll tell Maya the whole story, about her great-grandmother, about the brave people who protected these records. Some histories need to be remembered." Ethan nodded, carefully tucking the protected map into his jacket. The morning sun had risen higher, streaming through the shop's front windows and making the dust motes dance. He felt lighter somehow, as if the map had given him back something he hadn't realized he'd lost. As he headed for the door, Amara called after him, "Give Maya my love. And Ethan, your grandmother would be proud." He stepped out onto the sidewalk, a smile tugging at his lips. The street was coming alive with morning traffic, shopkeepers unlocking their doors, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery next door. Everything felt brighter, more possible. Across the street, a gray pickup truck idled at the curb, its driver hidden behind tinted windows. The kitchen light cast a warm glow over Ethan and Maya as they sat at their small table, a stack of yellowed letters spread before them. Outside, crickets chirped their evening song while the newly repaired mantel clock ticked steadily nearby. Maya hugged her knees to her chest in her favorite chair, her dark curls still damp from her bath. "Can we read another one, Dad?" Maya asked, carefully touching the edge of a letter. The paper was delicate, its creases well worn from years of folding and unfolding. Ethan smiled, selecting the next envelope from the pile. "All right, sweetheart, just one more before bedtime." He gently extracted the letter, noting his grandmother's elegant handwriting. The date at the top read June 15, 1968. "My dearest Thomas," Ethan began, reading his grandfather's name, "I hope this letter finds you well. The children miss you terribly, and I pray daily for your safe return from your business trip." He paused, remembering how his father had told him about those long absences when his grandfather traveled for work. Maya leaned forward, her chin resting on her knees. "What else does great-grandma say?" "Mr. Franklin came by the house again today," Ethan continued, his voice growing tighter as he read. "He made it clear that the bank would be reassessing all property values in our neighborhood. When I reminded him that we own our lots outright, he laughed and said ownership is just a matter of proper paperwork." Ethan's hands clenched slightly around the letter's edges. "The way he looked at me, Thomas, it was the same look he gave us at the bank meeting last month. He doesn't care that we have every legal right to our property. He doesn't care that we've built a life here." Maya's eyes widened. "Mr. Franklin, is that Mr. Keene's uncle?" "Yes, honey." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. Gerald Franklin was Marshall Keene's mother's brother. He continued reading. "I won't let them take what we've worked so hard for. Yesterday, I visited Mr. Chin at his clock shop. He's agreed to help me hide our important papers where they can't be found. The children think I'm just having the clocks cleaned, but each one now holds a piece of our future." Maya sat up straighter. "That's why she put things in the clocks." "Smart lady, your great-grandmother," Ethan said softly, picking up the next letter. This one was dated a week later. "Thomas, something terrible happened last night. Someone burned a cross on our front lawn. Mrs. Watson next door saw a car that looked like Mr. Franklin's driving away, but of course, no one will investigate. The children were terrified, but I told them we're not going anywhere. This is our home." Ethan had to pause, his throat tight. Maya slipped from her chair and came to stand beside him, her small hand finding his. "The bank certificates and deeds are safe now," the letter continued. "Mr. Chin helped me hide them in different clocks around town. Mr. Franklin can threaten all he wants, but he can't steal what he can't find. I've documented everything, the threats, the visits, the suspicious fires at other homes. Someday, the truth will come out." Maya squeezed her father's hand. "Great. Grandma was really brave, wasn't she?" "Yes, she was," Ethan agreed, his voice rough with emotion. He picked up another letter, dated several months later. "My love, they're calling it urban renewal, but we all know what it really means. They're forcing families out, block by block. The Johnsons lost their home last week. The bank suddenly discovered problems with their deed. The Williamses are next. Mr. Franklin came by again, offered to buy us out before things get difficult. I told him my grandfather built this house with his own hands, and no amount of money would make me leave it." Ethan's free hand curled into a fist. The same tactics were being used today, just wrapped in different words. He thought of Keene's veiled threats about social services, about stability. "I know some people think I'm foolish for fighting," the letter went on. "Maybe I am, but this isn't just about money or property anymore, Thomas. It's about justice. It's about standing up to men who think they can bully and threaten their way to whatever they want. I won't let them erase us from this town's history." Maya's voice was quiet. "Is that why you said no to Mr. Keene's money, Dad? Because it's about justice?" Ethan looked at his daughter, seeing the understanding in her young face. That's exactly right, sweetheart. Your great-grandmother fought to protect what was rightfully ours. She believed that someday someone would find these letters and understand the truth. We owe it to her to finish what she started. He read the letter's final lines. I've hidden copies of everything. Deeds, certificates, photographs, witness statements. Someday, when it's safe, when the right person finds them, the truth will come out. Until then, the clocks will keep our secrets, ticking away until it's time. All my love, Rosemary. Ethan gathered the letters carefully, sliding them back into their envelopes. Maya helped him, handling each one like it was made of glass. Together, they walked to the mantel where their clock sat, its brass face gleaming in the evening light. The right person did find them, Maya said, as Ethan opened the clock's hidden compartment. You found them, Dad? Ethan placed the letters back inside, his movements gentle and reverent. These weren't just pieces of paper. They were his grandmother's act of resistance, her refusal to be erased. He closed the compartment and set the clock back on the mantel, its steady ticking filling the quiet room. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of First Methodist, casting rainbow patterns across the worn wooden floors. The last notes of the closing hymn faded as the congregation began to stir, the rustle of Sunday best and quiet conversation filling the sanctuary. Maya sat straight-backed on the old piano bench, her feet barely reaching the pedals. Her small fingers hovered over the ivory keys for a moment before pressing down the first gentle notes of Blessed Assurance. The familiar melody floated through the church, drawing people to pause in their post-service conversations. Ethan watched from his spot near the back pew, his heart swelling with pride. Maya had practiced all week for this moment, determined to play for the congregation. Her blue dress, a hand-me-down from Ruth's granddaughter, swayed slightly as she swayed with the music. Wally Finch stood near the side door, his weathered hands gripping his worn hymnal. As Maya played, the old clockmaker's eyes grew misty. He fumbled in his pocket for a handkerchief, dabbing at the corners of his eyes. Ruth, who had been arranging flowers nearby, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Rosemary used to play it just like that, Wally whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Same tempo, same feeling. That little girl's got her grandmother's touch. The music filled every corner of the sanctuary, each note clear and true. Several members of the congregation had settled back into the pews to listen, nodding in appreciation. Deacon Isaiah stood near the pulpit, eyes closed, a peaceful smile on his face. As the final notes faded away, there was a moment of reverent silence before warm applause filled the church. Maya's face lit up with a bright smile as she turned on the bench, her legs swinging. The crowd began moving toward the fellowship hall, where tables were already set up for the fundraising potluck. The fellowship hall buzzed with activity. Folding tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes. Ruth's famous chicken and dumplings, Miss Eleanor's cornbread, at least 3 different versions of potato salad. The smell of coffee and fresh baked pie filled the air. Now that's what I call a spread, Isaiah said, helping Ethan fill Maya's plate. This town might not have much, but we know how to come together when it counts. Women from Ruth's quilting circle had set up a donation box near the dessert table, decorated with cheerful paper flowers Maya had made. Throughout the afternoon, people dropped in bills and checks, some offering quiet words of encouragement to Ethan as they passed. My daddy worked with your grandmother at the hospital, Miss Martinez said as she slipped an envelope into the box. She was always kind to everyone, no matter what others said. It's time things were set right. Maya flitted between tables like a happy butterfly, charming everyone with her stories about the magic clock that started it all. She had a special way of making even the grumpiest old-timers crack a smile. Wally, who usually avoided church socials, had settled into a corner with his coffee. He beckoned Ethan over, his expression serious, despite the festive atmosphere. You know, son, he said, his voice low, I've been thinking about those days when your grandmother would bring in her clocks. Should have spoken up then about what I suspected. But fear, it makes cowards of good men sometimes. Ethan shook his head. You're helping now, Wally. That's what matters. Ruth appeared with the donation box as the crowd began to thin, her eyes twinkling. Well, would you look at this? She began counting, making neat stacks on a nearby table. 200? 400? When she finished, the total was enough to cover the court filing fees, with a little left over. Ethan stared at the neat piles of bills and checks, overwhelmed by the generosity of his neighbors. See? Ruth said, patting his arm. The Lord provides, and sometimes he does it through pot roast and pineapple upside-down cake. The afternoon light was growing soft when Ethan and Maya finally headed home. Maya clutched a paper plate of leftover cookies, chattering excitedly about how many people had complimented her playing. Later that night, as Ethan tucked Maya into bed, her room was filled with the gentle ticking of the mantel clock they'd moved to her dresser. She'd insisted on having it nearby, calling it their good luck charm. "Did you see how many people came today, Dad?" Maya asked, snuggling under her worn but clean comforter. "And they all wanted to help us." "I sure did, sweetheart." Ethan smoothed her curls back from her forehead. "You know what? We might just win this." The mantel clock ticked steadily in the quiet room, its rhythm as constant as the hope growing in their hearts. The marble floors of Heritage Trust Bank echoed with each step as Ethan followed Nora Whitman down the long hallway. His work boots felt out of place against the polished stone, but he walked with his head held high, the folder of documents clutched firmly under his arm. The boardroom intimidated with its dark wood panels and tall windows. 5 trustees sat around the massive table, their expressions neutral, as Nora introduced Ethan. He noticed how their eyes lingered on his worn jacket and calloused hands. "Mr. Cole has provided extensive documentation supporting his claim." Nora began spreading papers across the table. "The evidence of continuous family ownership is compelling, even accounting for the gaps created by the 1970s replatting." The head trustee, Mr. Harrison, adjusted his reading glasses. "Walk us through the timeline, Miss Whitman." Nora moved with practiced efficiency, laying out copies of deeds, letters, and photographs in chronological order. Rosemary Hale purchased these properties in 1955. When pressured to sell in 68, she instead created this trust, naming her descendants as beneficiaries. She paused, tapping a yellowed certificate. The account was never closed, only frozen during the neighborhood restructuring. "And the dividends?" A trustee with silver hair leaned forward. "Automatically reinvested for 50 years. Nora's voice held quiet confidence. "The compound interest alone has created a substantial sum," Mr. Harrison finished. He studied Ethan over his glasses. "What are you seeking today, Mr. Cole?" Ethan cleared his throat. "Just what's fair, sir. Enough to cover legal costs for reclaiming the properties, and," he hesitated, then squared his shoulders, "and enough to keep the lights on while we fight this battle." The trustees exchanged glances. "Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. "Ms. Whitman has recommended releasing funds into an escrow account supervised by the bank to cover reasonable expenses during the property dispute." "We'd need documentation of all expenditures," the silver-haired trustee added. "Of course." Ethan's voice stayed steady, though his heart raced. "I can provide receipts for everything." Papers shuffled, pens scratched signatures. Within an hour, Nora was walking Ethan through the paperwork for a specialized checking account. "The funds will be available tomorrow morning," she explained, her normally reserved expression softening. "Pay those urgent bills first." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he signed the final form. "Thank you, all of you. I know my grandmother would be grateful to see things being made right." The next morning, Ethan sat in his truck outside the electric company office, staring at the check in his hands. The numbers looked impossible. Enough to clear his overdue balance and keep service running for months. He took a deep breath and walked inside. The clerk did a double take when she pulled up his account. "Paying in full today, Mr. Cole?" "Yes, ma'am." Pride and relief mingled in his voice. "And I'd like to set up automatic payments going forward." From there, he drove to the grocery store. In the parking lot, he unfolded the list he'd been adding to for weeks. All the things they'd done without. Fresh fruit, real cheese, milk that wasn't about to expire, meat that wasn't on clearance. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he pushed his cart down each aisle. He chose carefully, mindful of the trust's oversight, but allowed himself simple luxuries. Fresh bread from the bakery, crisp apples, a whole chicken for roasting. At the checkout, he didn't have to count pennies or put items back. Back home, Ethan filled the empty refrigerator while Maya was still at school. He arranged everything perfectly, wanting to surprise her. The afternoon light slanted through the kitchen window as he started dinner, the chicken roasting with potatoes and carrots. Maya's backpack hit the floor when she walked in. "Dad, what smells so good?" Ethan turned from the stove, grinning. "Check the fridge, sweetheart." She yanked the door open and gasped, Her eyes went wide at the sight of full shelves, lingering on the fruit drawer packed with apples, oranges, and grapes. Can we really have these? Help yourself. Ethan's throat tightened as she grabbed a handful of grapes, popping them into her mouth with pure joy. They sat down to dinner, real dinner, with fresh vegetables and warm rolls. Maya couldn't stop smiling as she ate, reaching for seconds of everything. When she bit into a ripe peach for dessert, juice running down her chin, Ethan had to blink back tears. His daughter's delight in simple fresh fruit showed just how long they'd been scraping by. But tonight, watching her clean her plate with enthusiasm, Ethan felt hope blooming as steady as his grandmother's clock ticking on the mantel. The musty church basement smelled of old hymnals and forgotten memories. Deacon Isaiah moved with practiced ease between towering metal shelves, his flashlight beam cutting through decades of dust. Ethan followed, carrying a cardboard box of files they'd been sorting all morning. Most folks don't know we kept records of everything, Isaiah said, his voice warm and steady. Every meeting, every service, every time someone tried to push us out. He paused at a shelf marked 1,971,975 and ran his finger along a row of manila envelopes. The basement's lone window cast weak Saturday morning light across Isaiah's face as he pulled out a small metal canister. Now what do we have here? He turned it over carefully, wiping away dust with his handkerchief. A faded paper label read, Community Meeting, March 1970. 1. An audio reel? Ethan leaned closer, squinting at the old recording tape. Isaiah nodded. We used to record important meetings, never knew when we'd need proof of what was said. He handled the reel with reverence. Let's see if old Betty still works. From behind a filing cabinet, Isaiah wheeled out a bulky reel-to-reel player. Betty's been with us since '65, he said, patting the machine fondly. Seen a lot of history through her speakers. It took them several minutes to thread the tape properly. Isaiah's fingers moved with gentle precision, as if handling a precious artifact. When he finally flipped the switch, the machine hummed to life. Static crackled through the speaker, then voices emerged, distant at first, then clearer. The sound of wooden chairs scraping across floorboards, murmured conversations, a gavel striking. March 15th, 1971, a man's voice announced. Emergency community meeting regarding the proposed replatting of Riverside Avenue properties. Ethan's breath caught. He leaned forward, straining to hear every word through the tape's soft hiss. Then another voice spoke, a woman's voice that made Ethan's heart skip, strong, clear, and unafraid. My name is Rosemary Hale, and I wish to make a statement for the record. Grandma, Ethan whispered. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Through the old speakers, Rosemary's voice carried the weight of truth. 3 nights ago, Mr. James Keene visited my home. He said the bank was doing me a favor, offering to buy my properties before the neighborhood changed. When I refused, he mentioned how tragic house fires can be, especially with children sleeping. Isaiah's hand found Ethan's shoulder, steadying him as Rosemary continued. The next day, I received notice that my properties were being replatted under the new development plan. The same plan Mr. Keene's brother helped draft on the city council. They mean to take what's ours through paper and ink since they couldn't take it through threats. The tape captured murmurs of anger from the assembled crowd. Rosemary's voice rose above them. I have documented every threat, every visit, every sudden change in property lines. I've hidden copies where they won't find them. And I'm telling you now, so there are witnesses. They cannot erase us from this land. We built these homes. We paid for these lots. And our children will know their heritage. Ethan sat perfectly still, tears tracking silently down his face as his grandmother's voice filled the basement. She named every banker who'd refused loans, every official who'd looked the other way, every businessman who'd tried to pressure families into selling. Mr. James Keene thinks we'll forget, Rosemary's voice rang out. He thinks his nephew Marshall will inherit clean hands and clear titles. But I tell you this, as long as one Hale draws breath, we'll remember. And someday, the truth will come to light. The tape continued with other testimonies, but Ethan barely heard them. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind, reaching across 50 years to give him strength. Isaiah stopped the tape. We need to preserve this, he said quietly, and make copies. They spent the next hour connecting Isaiah's laptop to the reel-to-reel player, carefully transferring the audio to digital files. Neither man spoke much, both weighted by the gravity of what they'd discovered. She knew, Ethan finally said as Isaiah saved the last file. She knew they'd try to bury it all, so she made sure the truth survived. Isaiah nodded, burning copies onto several USB drives. Your grandmother was a warrior, son. She fought with wisdom instead of weapons. He handed Ethan one of the drives. Now you carry her testimony forward. The sun was setting when Ethan finally headed home. In his truck, he plugged the USB drive into the stereo. Rosemary's voice filled the cab, strong and clear as ever. As long as one hail draws breath, we'll remember. Ethan drove slowly through the golden evening light, his grandmother's words washing over him. Each phrase, each detail she'd preserved, was another piece of armor for the battle ahead. He played it again, letting her voice guide him home, a beacon of truth cutting through decades of silence. The banging jolted Ethan from a deep sleep. His heart hammered as he fumbled for the bedside lamp, knocking over his water glass. The digital clock read 11:47 p.m. Ethan, please, you need to come. Amara's voice carried through the thin trailer walls, urgent and shaking. He stumbled to the door, checking Maya's room on the way. She was still asleep, her stuffed giraffe clutched tight. At the door, Ethan found Amara standing in her work clothes, hair disheveled, eyes wide with worry. Someone broke into the shop, she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. They took the clock with Rosemary's map. Ethan's stomach dropped. When? I just closed up at 9. When I went back for my forgotten phone at 11, the side window was smashed. Amara's voice cracked. I called the police, but I had to tell you right away. 20 minutes later, Ethan stood in Amara's shop, glass crunching under his boots. The display shelf where the second clock had sat was empty, though nothing else appeared disturbed. Officer Martinez took notes while Amara described the break-in. Targeted, Martinez said, shining his flashlight at the clean break in the window. They knew what they wanted. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. The map and that clock was their strongest piece of evidence. Rosemary's signature, the witness marks, proof of their claim to the riverside lots. We have the security footage, Amara said, leading them to her small office. The grainy video showed a figure in dark clothes, face hidden under a cap, moving straight to the clock's location. In and out in less than 2 minutes. There, Martinez pointed at the screen. A truck parked across the street. Gray, looks like a Ford. He rewound the footage, but the license plate was too blurry to read. Ethan remembered the gray truck he'd seen watching the shop days ago. His throat felt tight. Back home at 2 a.m., he couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, watching the original mantel clock tick steadily on the counter. Maya's door creaked open around 6. Daddy, why are you up so early? Just some work stuff, sweetie. He managed to smile. How about pancakes? He was flipping the last batch when someone knocked. His heart sank at the sight of a courier on his doorstep, holding out a thick envelope. Ethan Cole? Sign here, please. The legal document inside was printed on heavy paper with an official seal. Words jumped out at him. Temporary injunction and notice of frozen assets. His hands shook as he read further. Someone had filed a complaint claiming he'd manipulated historical records. The escrow account, their lifeline for legal fees and basic stability, was frozen pending investigation. Maya's voice seemed to come from far away. Is everything okay? Just fine, he said automatically, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Finish your breakfast, honey. We need to get you to school. The morning passed in a blur. He dropped Maya off, went through the motions at work, delivered packages with mechanical precision. His mind kept circling back to the stolen clock, the frozen account, the mounting pressure. That afternoon, he sat at the kitchen table, head buried in his hands. The mantel clock ticked on, each sound like a hammer striking his hope. They'd been so close. The trust money had meant keeping the lights on, feeding Maya properly, fighting for what was rightfully theirs. Now, it felt like everything was slipping away. The injunction lay spread before him, its legal language spelling out their vulnerability. Without access to the escrow funds, they'd be back to scraping by. Without the map from the stolen clock, proving their claim would be harder. And somewhere in the city, someone was working very deliberately to bury Rosemary's truth all over again. His shoulders shook, but he didn't cry. He couldn't afford to. Maya would be home from school soon, and she needed him to be strong. The kitchen silence pressed in around him, broken only by that steady, mocking tick-tock, tick-tock. This was exactly what Keen had warned him about, the exhausting, expensive fight ahead. But knowing it was coming hadn't made it hurt any less. The weight of it all crushed down on Ethan's bowed head as he sat alone at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. The evening shadows stretched long across Ethan's small kitchen as he sat staring at the stack of legal papers. The injunction notice lay on top, its official letterhead seeming to mock him. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, untouched since he'd poured it that morning. A gentle knock at the door pulled him from his daze. Through the window, he saw Ruth Delgado's familiar silhouette, a covered dish in her hands. The smell of homemade beef stew wafted in as he opened the door. "You look like you haven't eaten all day," Ruth said, her tone mixing concern with grandmotherly authority. She didn't wait for an invitation, heading straight for the kitchen to set down her burden. "Maya's at piano practice," Ethan said quietly, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Mrs. Peterson offered to take her today." "Good. Then you can sit down and have a proper meal while we talk." Ruth began opening cabinets, locating bowls with the ease of someone who'd raised 3 children of her own. Steam rose as she lifted the lid off the stew pot. Another knock came just as Ruth was setting out spoons. Wally Finch stood in the doorway, his weathered face more lined than usual. "Thought I might find you both here," the old clockmaker said, stepping inside. He removed his cap, twisting it in his hands, a nervous gesture Ethan had never seen from him before. Ruth ladled out 3 bowls of stew while Ethan pulled up extra chairs to the small table. For a few minutes, they ate in silence, the only sound the quiet ticking of the mantel clock, Rosemary's clock, that had started everything. "I know that look in your eyes, Ethan Cole," Ruth finally said, setting down her spoon. "That's the look of a man thinking about giving up." Ethan pushed a chunk of potato around his bowl. "Maybe Keen's right. Maybe I'm just making things worse for Maya by fighting this." "The Lord didn't bring you to the river to watch you drown," Ruth said firmly. She reached across the table and gripped his hand. "Your grandmother didn't hide those documents just to have you surrender them to the very people who tried to steal them in the first place." Wally cleared his throat, setting his bowl aside. "There's something I need to say." His voice was rough with emotion. "Something I should have said weeks ago when you first brought in that clock." Ethan and Ruth turned to look at him. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "I knew Rosemary was hiding something in those clocks she brought to me. Not the details, mind you, but I knew it was important. The way she'd check over her shoulder, how careful she was about who saw her come into the shop." He swallowed hard. "The day after that cross burned on her lawn, she came to me with 3 different timepieces. Asked me to check them all, make sure they were secure." The look in her eyes, I knew she was protecting something precious. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Ethan asked softly. "Fear," Wally admitted, shame evident in his voice. "Plain old cowardice. Those were ugly times, and I told myself it wasn't my business. That I was just a clockmaker, not a hero." He looked up at Ethan, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I've carried that guilt for 40 years. Ruth reached out and patted Wally's arm. "The past is past, Wally. What matters is what we do now." "She's right," Ethan said, surprising himself with the strength in his voice. "We can't change what happened then, but we can make it right now." "Your grandmother used to say that sometimes the Lord works through the most ordinary things," Ruth remembered. "A shepherd's staff, a handful of flour, a little clock from a thrift shop." She smiled. "She also said that when you don't know what to do next, you start with prayer." "Been a while since I've done much praying," Wally admitted. "No time like the present," Ruth said, reaching for their hands. "Join me?" They formed a circle around the table, hands linked. The mantel clock ticked steadily in the background as Ruth's warm voice filled the kitchen. "Lord, we come to you tonight with heavy hearts, but not without hope. Guide us in this struggle for justice. Give us wisdom to see your path forward and courage to walk it. Protect Ethan and Maya and help us honor Rosemary's sacrifice. We know that with you, all things are possible, even when the way seems dark. And Lord," Wally added unexpectedly, his voice rough with emotion, "forgive an old man's silence and help us speak truth now when it matters most. Show us the next step," Ethan whispered, squeezing the hands he held. "Not the whole staircase, just the next step." "In Jesus' name," Ruth concluded softly. "Amen," they said together. As if in answer, rain began to fall outside, its gentle patter against the trailer's metal roof like a benediction. Early morning sunlight streamed through the living room window, casting a warm glow on Maya's fingers as they danced across the piano keys. The familiar notes of blessed assurance filled their small trailer, bringing a moment of peace to their troubled home. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, carefully examining the mantel clock's pendulum with the set of small tools Wally had lent him. "The timing's still off," Ethan muttered, adjusting the small weight. He'd been working on it since dawn, trying to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on their setbacks. The stolen second clock and frozen accounts weighed heavily on him, but he didn't want Maya to see his worry. "Should I play it again, Dad?" Maya asked, pausing at the end of the hymn. Her ponytail swung as she turned to face him. "Sure, sweetheart. Maybe hearing it will help me focus." Ethan managed a small smile, touched by her eagerness to help. Maya began playing again, her small hands confident on the keys. The melody filled their home with its gentle reassurance. As she reached the chorus, the mantel clock suddenly chimed, but something about the sound caught Ethan's attention. He looked up from his work, frowning. "Maya, could you play that part again?" She nodded and repeated the chorus. Once again, the clock chimed, but not in its usual pattern. Instead of the standard Westminster chimes, it played an odd sequence of notes. "That's strange," Ethan said, standing up to examine the clock more closely. "It's not supposed to chime like that." "Maybe it's special music for the hymn?" Maya suggested, still playing. Ethan's mind raced back to what Wally had said about Rosemary being a church pianist. "Maya, keep playing," he said, his voice tight with sudden excitement. He listened intently as the clock chimed its peculiar sequence again. "It's not random," he realized aloud. "The chimes, they're following some kind of pattern." He grabbed a piece of paper and started marking down the sequence of notes as Maya played through the hymn again. After 3 more repetitions, Ethan stared at his notations. The pattern was deliberate. It had to be. His grandmother had been clever enough to hide documents in the clock. Could she have done more? "Maya, honey, I need to make a quick call." He pulled out his phone and dialed Wally's number, drumming his fingers nervously on the table as it rang. "Bit early for social calls," Wally's gruff voice answered. "The chimes?" Ethan said without preamble. "Did my grandmother ever have you work on the chime mechanism specifically?" There was a pause on the other end. "Come to think of it, she did. Insisted on some special adjustments. Thought it was odd at the time, but..." Wally's voice trailed off. "Why do you ask?" "Because I think she left us another message." Ethan explained what they'd discovered. "Could there be another compartment? One that opens with the right sequence?" "Wouldn't put it past her," Wally said. "Bring it over. Now." 20 minutes later, Ethan and Maya stood in Wally's workshop. The old clockmaker had cleared his workbench and laid out his tools with precise care. The morning light filtering through the dusty windows caught the brass of the clock as Wally examined it. "Maya, would you play that hymn on my phone?" Ethan asked, pulling up a recording he'd made before they left. The familiar tune filled the workshop as Wally listened to the chimes, his experienced hands exploring the clock's surface. "There," he muttered after the 3rd repetition. "Feel this panel? It's got a different resonance." His fingers pressed specific points on the clock's base, in sequence with the chimes. A soft click sounded from within the clock. Maya gasped as a small drawer, previously invisible, sprang open from the base. Inside lay a yellowed envelope and several carefully folded papers. With trembling fingers, Ethan lifted out the contents. The first document was a set of original bank receipts, dated 1968, showing his grandmother's payments on the Riverside properties. But it was the second item that made his breath catch, a handwritten letter on faded stationery. "To whom it may concern," Ethan read aloud, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I, Margaret Keene, wife of the late Harrison Keene, can no longer carry the burden of silence regarding the events of 1971, 1972. Maya moved closer to her father as he continued reading. The letter detailed how Harrison Keene, the current Marshall Keene's uncle, had orchestrated the illegal replatting of minority-owned properties, using threats and manipulation to force families out of their homes. Margaret had written the confession years later, signing and dating it before a notary. "She sent this to Rosemary," Ethan said softly, examining the envelope. "But Grandma never used it. She hid it here instead, protecting it until it was needed." "Smart woman," Wally commented, gently closing the now empty drawer. She knew someday someone would need more than just her word against theirs. Ethan carefully folded the documents and placed them in his jacket pocket, their weight feeling like both a burden and a blessing. His grandmother had left them one final gift, the truth, preserved in music and mechanics, waiting for the right moment to be heard. "What happens now, Dad?" Maya asked, slipping her small hand into his. Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his mind already racing with the implications of their discovery. The notarized confession, combined with the original receipts, could prove not just their claim, but the systematic nature of what had been done to the Riverside families. The security monitor's blue glow cast harsh shadows across Amara's face as she leaned forward, rewinding the footage for what felt like the 100th time. Ethan stood behind her chair, his hands gripping the backrest until his knuckles turned white. The thrift shop's back room was cramped and stuffy, filled with the musty scent of old books and forgotten treasures. "There," Amara said, jabbing her finger at the screen. 3:42 a.m. The grainy footage showed a figure in dark clothing moving through the shop's rear entrance. The lock had been jimmied open with practiced ease. Ethan watched as the thief went straight for the display where the second clock had been kept, ignoring other valuable items along the way. They knew exactly what they were looking for, Ethan muttered. Amara nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Wait for it." She fast-forwarded slightly. "There's the exit." The figure emerged moments later, clock tucked under one arm. But this time, something else caught Ethan's eye. "Can you zoom in on that window?" Through the shop's front display window, barely visible in the streetlight's glow, sat a gray pickup truck. The same one he'd noticed watching the shop the day they'd found the plat map. "I know that truck," Ethan said, his voice tight. "It was here that Monday morning." Amara squinted at the screen. "The resolution's not great, but—" She tapped a few keys, enhancing the image. "Look at that logo on the door." Even through the pixelated footage, the distinctive yellow and black emblem of Keen Construction was unmistakable. "Got you," Ethan whispered. Amara was already reaching for her phone. "I'm calling Detective Martinez." She took the initial report. Within an hour, the small back room was crowded with 2 police officers. Detective Martinez, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, reviewed the footage several times while her partner took notes. "The truck's registered to Keen Construction's fleet," Martinez confirmed, looking up from her tablet. "And you say you recognized it from before?" "Yes," Ethan explained, recounting how he'd spotted it, watching the shop. "Right after we found important documents in another clock, documents that could affect a legal dispute with Marshall Keen." Martinez's eyebrows rose slightly. "The developer? This could establish motive." She turned to her partner. "Call Judge Wilson for a warrant. We'll need to search that construction yard." The next few hours crawled by like molasses. Ethan paced the shop floor while Amara arranged her inventory, both too anxious to sit still. Finally, Martinez called. "We found it," she said without preamble. "The clock was in a storage container at the Keen Construction yard. We're bringing it in now." Relief flooded through Ethan's body, making his knees weak. He steadied himself against a display case. "There's more," Martinez continued. "We found tools matching the break-in damage, and security footage shows a company vehicle leaving the yard at 3:15 a.m. that night. The driver's face is clear, one of Keen's site managers. He's already talking, claiming Keen ordered him to retrieve specific items from your shop. 15 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up outside the thrift shop. Officer Chin emerged, carefully carrying the second clock. The antique timepiece looked unharmed, its wooden case still gleaming with age and care. Ethan took it with trembling hands, feeling its familiar weight. The clock that had caused so much trouble, that held such vital proof of his family's claim, was back where it belonged. He ran his fingers over the smooth wood, checking for damage. "We'll need to keep it as evidence eventually," Martinez said, watching him. "But our forensics team has documented everything. You can hold on to it for now." Amara touched Ethan's arm gently. "We should get it back in the safe." He nodded, still staring at the clock. This wasn't just about money anymore. It wasn't even just about justice for his grandmother. This was about standing up to bullies who thought they could steal and threaten their way to whatever they wanted. About showing Maya that doing the right thing mattered, even when it was hard. "Thank you," he said to Martinez, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you." The detective gave him a small smile. "We'll be in touch soon. The DA's office will want to talk to you about pressing charges." After the officers left, Amara locked the shop's front door and flipped the sign to "Closed." She turned to find Ethan still cradling the clock, his expression determined. "You know this isn't over," she said quietly. "No," Ethan agreed, his grip on the clock tightening slightly. "But for the first time since this all started, I think we might actually win." "You will," Amara said firmly, "because you're not fighting alone." Ethan looked down at the clock in his hands, this simple object that had somehow become a symbol of everything he was fighting for. His grandmother had trusted these clocks to protect their family's legacy. Now, decades later, they were finally fulfilling their purpose. "Let's get this somewhere safe," he said. Together, they carried the clock to Amara's office, where a sturdy safe waited beneath her desk. As the heavy door swung shut with a satisfying click, Ethan felt a new resolve settle over him. Keen had shown his hand, revealed just how far he would go to keep what he'd stolen. But Ethan wasn't backing down. Not anymore. The ticking of the shop's mini clocks filled the silence, their steady rhythm like a heartbeat, reminding him that time was finally on his side. The trustee boardroom's mahogany walls seemed to close in around them as Ethan placed the items one by one on the polished table. First, the original bank receipts, their edges yellowed but the ink still clear. Next, the confession letter from the banker's widow, its handwriting delicate but firm. Finally, the recovered second clock, its brass face gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Nora Whitman sat at the head of the table, flanked by 4 other trustees in dark suits. Marshall Keene occupied a chair near the door, his usual confidence replaced by a tense stillness. The police detective, who'd recovered the clock, stood quietly in the corner, notebook in hand. "Mrs. Whitman, members of the board," Ethan began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "These documents prove beyond doubt that my grandmother, Rosemary Hale, maintained legal ownership of the Riverside properties through continuous documentation and payment of taxes, even after being forced from her home." He lifted the confession letter. "This letter, written by Margaret Keene 15 years ago, details how her husband, the former bank manager, orchestrated the illegal replatting scheme. She describes specific threats made against my grandmother and other families in the neighborhood." Keene shifted in his chair, but remained silent. Nora adjusted her reading glasses and examined the letter carefully. "The signature matches our records of Margaret Keene's account documents." She passed it to her fellow trustees. "And the recovered clock?" "Found in a storage unit registered to Keene Construction," the detective spoke up. "Along with other items from recent break-ins." Color drained from Keeney's face. He opened his mouth to speak, but his lawyer touched his arm, silencing him. Ethan continued. "The original plat map inside this clock bears my grandmother's signature and those of 2 witnesses. Together with the bank receipts and audio testimony we previously submitted, they form an unbroken chain of ownership." The trustees huddled together, speaking in low voices. Minutes stretched like hours as Ethan stood, hands clasped behind his back. He thought of Maya at school, probably practicing piano during her lunch break, unaware that their future hung in the balance. Finally, Nora straightened up. "The board has reached a unanimous decision. The Cole Trust is hereby fully reinstated, with all associated properties and accumulated dividends to be released immediately." She turned to Keene. "Furthermore, we are obligated to report these findings to the proper authorities for investigation into the illegal property seizures." Keene surged to his feet. "This is absurd. These properties have been developed, improved. You can't just—" "Mr. Keene," Nora cut in sharply, "given the evidence of criminal conspiracy and recent attempts to suppress evidence, I suggest you choose your next words carefully." The room fell silent. Ethan looked at Keene, really looked at him. He saw not just the powerful developer, but also the son who'd inherited his father's sins, who'd chosen to perpetuate old wrongs rather than make them right. "If I may," Ethan said quietly, "I have a proposal." All eyes turned to him. Even Keene's lawyer looked curious. "Instead of pursuing personal charges, I propose a community restitution plan." Ethan withdrew a folder from his briefcase. "Keene Construction will fund necessary repairs and improvements for current Riverside residents, many of whom are descendants of families affected by the original displacement." He laid out a simple document. "Additionally, the Cole Trust will establish the Rosemary Hale Foundation, dedicated to fair housing education and small business grants in the community. Mr. Keene's company would contribute a percentage of profits from Riverside developments to this foundation for the next 10 years. The trustees examined the proposal. Nora's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "This is quite generous, Mr. Cole. Are you certain?" Ethan nodded. "My grandmother hid those documents to preserve justice, not revenge. This way, something good can finally grow from all this pain." Keene stared at the proposal, his hands trembling slightly. The mask of arrogance had cracked, revealing something almost vulnerable underneath. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, but Keene waved him off. "Why? he asked Ethan. "Why offer this instead of ruining me?" "Because that's not what this was ever about," Ethan replied simply. "This was about making things right." The room was quiet, except for the gentle ticking of the recovered clock. Keene looked from the proposal to Ethan, then to the trustees. His shoulders sagged, as if a great weight was both lifting and settling at the same time. Slowly, hesitantly, Keene nodded. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the First Community Bank's conference room, warming the leather chairs where Ethan, Ruth, Isaiah, and Nora gathered around a table scattered with draft documents. A coffee pot burbled quietly in the corner, filling the air with its rich aroma. "The Rosemary Hale Foundation." Ruth read aloud from the header page, her voice tender with reverence. "It's perfect, Ethan. Your grandmother would be so proud." Isaiah adjusted his reading glasses, reviewing the mission statement they'd spent the morning crafting. Education and opportunity. That's what Rosemary always fought for. This foundation will carry that torch forward. Nora spread out several diagrams showing the Riverside neighborhood. Red circles marked the homes already slated for repairs by Keene Construction. "Marshall's crew started work yesterday on the Thompson place," she reported. "New roof, updated wiring, fresh paint. They're doing right by these properties." "Amazing what a little pressure and prayer can do," Ruth commented, earning knowing smiles from around the table. Ethan picked up one of the grant application drafts they'd been working on. Small business loans, first-time homebuyer assistance, legal aid for housing discrimination cases. He shook his head in wonder. "When I bought that broken clock for Maya, I never imagined it would lead to all this." "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Isaiah said, patting Ethan's shoulder. "Sometimes through dusty old timepieces." They spent the next hour fine-tuning the foundation structure. Nora explained the legal framework while Isaiah contributed ideas for historical preservation projects. Ruth's practical experience with community organizing helped shape the grant distribution process. "We'll need a board of directors," Nora noted, making another notation. "I suggest 7 members to start, representing different aspects of the community." "Ruth should be chairwoman," Ethan said immediately. "No one knows this town's heart better." Ruth waved her hand dismissively, but her eyes sparkled. "Oh, now don't you try to sweet-talk me, young man, but—" She paused, smoothing her skirt. "I suppose someone needs to keep all you youngsters in line." Isaiah chuckled. "I'll serve as historical advisor, if you'll have me. These records need to be preserved properly." They worked through lunch, Ruth sharing homemade oatmeal cookies while they hammered out detail. The foundation would start modest, but grow steadily, funded by a percentage of the trust's assets and matching grants from local businesses, including Keene Construction. "Speaking of Keene," Nora mentioned, checking her phone. "His team just sent over the first progress report from Riverside. Want to see?" She passed her tablet around, showing photos of workers replacing rotted porch boards, installing new windows, and clearing overgrown yards. The transformation was already visible. "Look at Mrs. Jenkins' house," Ruth exclaimed, pointing to a primage of fresh yellow paint being applied to a small bungalow. "She's lived there 40 years, raised 5 children in that home. Now she can finally get the repairs she deserves." Ethan felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. This was what his grandmother had wanted. Not just justice for their family, but healing for the whole community. "The education programs are crucial," Isaiah reminded them, tapping the relevant section of the proposal. "Young people need to understand this history so it's never repeated. We'll offer workshops on fair housing laws, financial literacy, homeowner rights, and partnering with the Technical College for Trade Apprenticeships," Ruth added. "Give our youth solid skills and good jobs right here at home." Nora gathered the final drafts into a neat stack, placing them before Ethan along with an elegant fountain pen. "Everything's in order. Once you sign, the Rosemary Hale Foundation officially exists." Ethan took a deep breath, looking at each face around the table. Ruth's warm encouragement, Isaiah's quiet wisdom, Nora's professional confidence. He thought of Maya, practicing piano in their new home on Riverside Avenue. He thought of his grandmother, bravely hiding her treasures in old clocks, trusting they would be found when the time was right. His hand steady, he uncapped the pen and signed his name to the foundation documents. The late September sun painted golden streaks across the worn brick facade of 423 Riverside Avenue. Ethan Cole stood on the front lawn, keys jingling in his pocket, watching a parade of pickup trucks and cars pull up to the curb. Ruth's red minivan led the convoy, followed by Isaiah's station wagon and Wally's trusty blue Ford. "This is really happening, isn't it, Dad?" Maya bounced on her toes beside him, her ponytail swinging with excitement. "Sure is, sweetheart." Ethan squeezed her shoulder, still amazed at how their lives had changed in just a few months. The house wasn't fancy, just a modest two-story with cream-colored trim and deep green shutters. But it was solid. It was theirs. And most importantly, it was home. Ruth emerged from her van carrying a box marked "Kitchen" in bold letters. "Well, don't just stand there admiring it. Let's get moving." The morning air filled with laughter and friendly chatter as volunteers formed a human chain, passing boxes and furniture from vehicles to porch. Isaiah directed traffic from the front steps, clipboard in hand. Living room items to the right, kitchen straight back, bedrooms upstairs. Wally arrived last, carefully maneuvering his way through the bustle with something large wrapped in an old quilt. "Got a little housewarming present here," he called out gruffly, though his eyes twinkled. "Need some help getting it inside." Ethan hurried to assist, and together they carried the mysterious package into the living room. Maya trailed behind them, curiosity evident on her face. "Go ahead." Wally nodded to her. "You can do the honors." Maya pulled back the quilt to reveal a magnificent wall clock, its cherry wood case gleaming and brass pendulum catching the light from the windows. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers along the carved details. "Found it at an estate sale last month," Wally explained. "Took some work to get it running smooth again, but she's keeping perfect time now." He paused, clearing his throat. "Thought this house could use a proper timekeeper." Ethan clasped the older man's shoulder, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Wally. It's perfect." The morning flowed into afternoon as boxes were unpacked, furniture arranged, and rooms slowly transformed from empty spaces into lived-in corners of home. The kitchen came alive with Ruth organizing cabinets and stocking them with casseroles and baked goods. Isaiah assembled bookshelves while humming old hymns. Around 2 o'clock, Amara arrived with her teenage sons, carrying Maya's upright piano wrapped carefully in moving blankets. They positioned it against the living room's interior wall, right where the morning sun would warm its keys. "Try it out," Ethan encouraged as Maya hovered nearby, fingers twitching. She needed no further invitation. Soon, the familiar notes of blessed assurance filled the house, weaving between the sounds of shuffling boxes and friendly conversation. The new wall clock's steady tick-tock joined in, keeping time with the music. As evening approached, the helpers began to say their goodbyes. Ruth left a pot of soup simmering on the stove. Isaiah made sure all the light fixtures were working. Wally double-checked the clock's positioning and wound it carefully. "Remember," he instructed, "wind it every Sunday evening. Same time. She'll treat you right if you treat her right." Finally, it was just Ethan and Maya, standing in their new living room as twilight softened the edges of unfamiliar shadows. The wall clock chimed 7 times, the sound rich and homey in the quiet space. "Want to see your room again?" Ethan asked. Maya nodded, taking his hand as they climbed the stairs. Her bedroom was at the back of the house, with a window seat overlooking the small backyard. They'd painted it sunshine yellow last weekend, and her quilts from Ruth already brightened the bed. "Can I sleep in here tonight?" she asked, though they'd already discussed it. "Even with some boxes still around?" "Of course." Ethan helped her make the bed with fresh sheets, tucking the corners just the way she liked. Later, after a simple dinner of Ruth's soup and some sandwiches, Ethan stood in the doorway of Maya's room. She was already in her pajamas, arranging her stuffed animals on the window seat. "Ready for bed?" "Almost." She surveyed her work critically. "Dad, is this really our house now? Forever?" Ethan crossed the room and sat beside her. "Yes, Maya. This is our home. Your grandmother made sure of that." She leaned against him, yawning. "I think she'd like it here, especially Wally's clock." "I think you're right." He kissed the top of her head. "Time for sleep, kiddo." After Maya was tucked in, Ethan walked through the quiet house, double-checking locks and turning off lights. He paused in the living room, watching the clock's pendulum swing in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Its steady rhythm seemed to say, "Home, home, home." In his own bedroom, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, taking in the familiar furniture in this unfamiliar space. Through the wall, he could hear the clock's gentle ticking. Downstairs, the piano waited for tomorrow's songs. And down the hall, his daughter slept safely in her very own room, in their very own house. He changed into his sleep clothes and slipped under the covers, feeling the weight of the day's work in his muscles. The bed was positioned so he could see out the window, where stars winked above the rooftops of Riverside Avenue, his grandmother's street, his street, their home. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole fell asleep without worry about tomorrow's mail or next month's rent. The wall clock kept its steady vigil downstairs, marking the moments of their first night home with quiet confidence. The Monday morning sun streamed through the community center's tall windows, casting long shadows across the wooden workbenches where Wally Finch stood surrounded by 4 teenagers. His weathered hands moved deliberately as he demonstrated how to properly hold a cleaning brush. "Gentle now," he said, his gruff voice softened with patience. "These old clock parts need respect. Too rough, and you'll scratch the brass. Too timid, and the grime stays put." 14-year-old Marcus leaned forward, eyes fixed on Wally's movements. "Like this, Mr. Finch?" He mimicked the circular motion with his own brush. "That's the way." Wally nodded, a hint of pride crossing his face. "You've got steady hands, son." Across the room, the gentle whirring of sewing machines filled the air as Ruth's quilting circle worked at their stations. Bright squares of fabric lay scattered across long tables, forming a patchwork rainbow that caught Maya's attention as she wandered between the two groups. "Come here, sweetie," Ruth called, waving Maya over. "Want to help us pick colors for Mrs. Johnson's welcome blanket?" Maya skipped to Ruth's table, running her fingers over the soft cotton pieces. "Which ones are we choosing from?" "Well now," Ruth adjusted her reading glasses. "We've got these lovely blues and creams that remind me of summer clouds. But there's also this warm yellow that just makes you smile." The other quilters, Sarah, Betty, and Louise, looked up from their work, smiling as Maya carefully considered each fabric square. Her small hands sorted through the pieces with surprising care. "I think..." Maya held up 2 squares. "The yellow would make her happy when she's sad about moving, but the blue is peaceful, like when Dad reads me stories at bedtime." "Why don't we use both?" Louise suggested, her silver hair catching the light. "The best quilts tell a story with their colors." At the clock repair station, Wally's voice carried over. "Now here's the tricky part, setting the escapement. One wrong move, and your clock's timing goes all cattywampus." The teens huddled closer, watching as Wally's practiced hands adjusted the tiny mechanism. Justin, usually more interested in his phone than anything else, actually put the device down to get a better look. "Where'd you learn all this, Mr. Finch?" asked Sophie, the only girl in the clock repair group. Wally's eyes grew distant for a moment. "My father taught me, just like his father taught him. Back then, every town needed someone who could keep their timepieces ticking." He paused, checking the alignment. "These old clocks, they're more than just machines. They're pieces of history, marking time for generations of families." Maya wandered over, drawn by the rhythmic ticking of the practice clocks. She watched as Marcus successfully cleaned his first gear. Wally's quiet, "Well done," making the boy beam with pride. Back at the quilting tables, Ruth threaded a needle and patted the chair beside her. "Come here, Maya. Let me show you how to do a running stitch." Maya settled in, tongue poking out in concentration as Ruth guided her hands through the motion. "Like this?" "Perfect," Ruth praised. "You're a natural, just like your grandmother was." The mention of Rosemary made Maya smile. "Did she quilt with you too?" "Oh yes," Ruth nodded, helping Maya start another row. "She said every stitch was like a little prayer, blessing whoever would receive the quilt." The morning light shifted to afternoon gold as the two groups worked side by side. Wally's clock repair lesson evolved into stories about the town's history, while the quilting circle shared memories of past projects and the families they'd helped. Sophie successfully wound her first mainspring under Wally's guidance. "It's like a puzzle," she said, eyes bright with accomplishment. "That's exactly right," Wally agreed. "Every clock has its own personality, its own story to tell. You just have to listen carefully enough to hear it." The quilting circle had finished the top layer of Mrs. Johnson's welcome blanket, the blues and yellows flowing together like a sunrise. Maya's slightly uneven stitches added character to one corner, a testament to her first quilting lesson. Ethan arrived just as the afternoon session was winding down. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene before him. The sounds of gentle instruction and friendly chatter filled the room. Wally's clock repair students carefully packing away their tools, the quilting circle folding their day's work with practiced hands, and Maya moving between both groups with natural ease. His daughter caught sight of him and ran over, proudly displaying her bandaged finger, a badge of honor from her first encounter with a quilting needle. "Dad, look what I helped make." Ruth carried over the quilt top, holding it up so Ethan could see. "Your girl's got a good eye for color and a kind heart for the work, just like her grandmother." Wally joined them, wiping his hands on a cloth. "And these young folks?" He gestured to his students who were carefully storing their practice clocks. "They're learning more than just repairs. They're learning about patience, precision, and pride in good work." Ethan watched as the teens said their goodbyes, each one thanking Wally in their own way. Marcus with a firm handshake, Sophie with a quick hug, Justin with a respectful nod, and Tommy with an enthusiastic fist bump that made the old clockmaker chuckle. The quilting circle began packing up their supplies, but not before making Maya promise to return next week for another lesson. Each woman hugged her goodbye, leaving her with small tokens, a thimble from Louise, a special needle from Betty, and a stack of fabric squares from Sarah just to practice with. Ruth folded the last table while Wally locked up his tool cabinet. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. The community center hummed with the kind of contentment that comes from a day well spent, from people sharing not just their skills but their hearts. Ethan stood there, watching it all, his heart so full it nearly hurt. This was what Rosemary had fought for, not just property or justice, but community. A place where skills were passed down, where stories were shared, where history lived on in the hands of the young, learning from the old. Maya tugged at his sleeve, showing him the neat row of stitches she'd managed on a practice piece. "Can we come back next week, Dad? Mrs. Ruth says I can help with the binding on the next quilt." The church archive room smelled of old paper and wood polish, a familiar scent that brought comfort to those who gathered there that afternoon. Deacon Isaiah moved with purpose, his careful hands organizing the collection of yellowed documents, photographs, and letters that told the story of the Hale family's struggle and triumph. Sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting patches of colored light across the oak shelves and filing cabinets. The small room, usually quiet and solitary, now held a dozen people who had come to witness this moment of remembrance. "Each paper," Isaiah said, sliding a document into an acid-free sleeve, "is more than just a record. It's a piece of our community's soul." His voice carried the weight of years spent preserving stories that others had tried to erase. Ethan stood nearby, watching as Isaiah arranged the items in chronological order. The bank certificates, property deeds, and Rosemary's letters, each piece now carefully preserved in protective covering, formed a timeline of courage and perseverance. Maya sat cross-legged on a sturdy wooden chair, her eyes wide as she watched Ruth and Wally help Isaiah arrange the display. They had transformed one wall of the archive room into a tribute to Rosemary Hale, with her portrait, a black and white photograph showing a young woman with determined eyes and a gentle smile, as its centerpiece. "The frame was my grandmother's," Ruth said, adjusting the gold-painted frame that now held Rosemary's photograph. "Seemed fitting to use it for another strong woman who changed things for the better." Nora Whitman stood near the doorway, holding a leather-bound folder containing copies of the trust reinstatement papers. "The bank's archives will have copies too," she said, "but these belong here, where people can learn from them." Isaiah carefully placed the audio reel, recording in a special preservation box. "This voice," he said, touching the container reverently, "spoke truth when others demanded silence." The small group gathered closer as Ethan stepped forward. He cleared his throat, emotion making his voice slightly rough. "My grandmother," he began, "taught piano at this church for 30 years. She believed in harmony, not just in music, but in life." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "She hid these documents not out of fear, but out of hope. Hope that someday someone would find them and make things right." The afternoon light shifted, creating a warm glow in the room. Amara, who had closed her shop early to attend, nodded in agreement. "She knew what she was doing with those clocks," she said softly. "Each one a time capsule of truth." "The Rosemary Hale Foundation," Isaiah continued, holding up the newly framed mission statement, "will ensure her work continues. Every grant, every repaired home, every student helped, all of it carries forward what she started." Maya stood up and walked to the table, where a crystal vase held a dozen red roses. The flowers had been Sarah's contribution, cut fresh from her garden that morning. With careful movements, Maya selected one perfect bloom. "She would have loved your piano playing," Ruth told Maya gently, "especially Blessed Assurance. That was her favorite hymn to teach." Ethan watched as his daughter approached Rosemary's photograph. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that holds meaning rather than emptiness. Maya reached up, standing on tiptoe to place the single red rose in the small brass holder mounted beside the frame. The rose sat proud and bright against the warm wood paneling, its petals catching the colored light from the windows. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of generations, past, present, and future, bound together by love, justice, and the courage to preserve truth until its time had come. Isaiah adjusted his glasses and picked up the final document, Rosemary's original letter from the clock. "This one," he said, "goes in the center of the display, because sometimes the most important things are written from the heart." The group stood in respectful silence as Maya's rose cast a delicate shadow across her grandmother's smiling face, a bridge between then and now, between what was lost and what was finally found. The late summer sun blazed overhead as Ethan walked down Riverside Avenue, taking in the symphony of hammers, saws, and cheerful conversation that had become the street's daily music. 3 months had transformed the once quiet neighborhood into a bustling scene of revival and renewal. Fresh paint brightened old porches in shades of warm cream and sky blue. The scent of newly cut lumber mingled with blooming flowers from the gardens that now dotted front yards. Where chain-link fences had rusted, white pickets now stood straight and proud. Each house seemed to stand a little taller, as if sharing in the neighborhood's renewed dignity. Ethan paused to watch Mr. Chin, who'd lived on the street for 30 years, carefully painting his porch railings a deep forest green. The older man's movements were precise and unhurried, each brushstroke applied with care. His grandson Tommy sat nearby, small paintbrush in hand, practicing on a piece of scrap wood. "Looking good, Mr. Chin," Ethan called out, earning a satisfied nod. "Better than new," Mr. Chin replied, stepping back to admire his work. "My father always said, don't just fix it, make it better." The sound of children's laughter drew Ethan's attention to the community garden that had sprung up in what was once an empty lot. Maya and several other kids were helping Mrs. Rodriguez plant late summer vegetables, their hands dirty but their faces bright with purpose. The old chain-link fence that had surrounded the lot was gone, replaced by a low wooden border built by Wally's young apprentices. Ethan continued down the sidewalk, noting how the cracked concrete had been replaced section by section. The new paths were smooth and even, with young trees planted along the verge. Their leaves rustled in the warm breeze that carried the river's fresh scent through the neighborhood. At Mrs. Washington's house, he found the elderly woman sitting in her porch rocker, watching 2 of Keene's contractors measure her front steps. The wooden treads had rotted through in places, making it dangerous for her to navigate. "Morning, Mrs. Washington," Ethan called, climbing the old steps carefully. "I brought those brackets we talked about." Her face lit up. "Ethan Cole, you're just who I needed to see. These nice young men say the whole thing needs replacing, but I want someone I trust to look it over." Ethan knelt to examine the stairs structure. The contractors stepped back respectfully, clipboards in hand. He could see they'd made the right assessment. The stringers were water damaged beyond repair. "They're right, Mrs. Washington," he said, standing and brushing off his knees. "But I'll help them rebuild it. We'll make it just like the original, only stronger." She smiled, relief evident in her eyes. "Your grandmother would be proud, you know. She always said the street was meant for neighbors, helping neighbors." The next few hours passed in steady work. Ethan and the contractors carefully demolished the old steps while preserving the ornate Victorian railings that Mrs. Washington loved. Other neighbors stopped by to help or offer cold drinks. Ruth appeared with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and Isaiah brought his toolbox when word spread they needed an extra saw. The new steps took shape steadily. Ethan showed Tommy and some other neighborhood kids how to measure twice and cut once, letting them help with the simpler tasks. Mrs. Washington supervised from her rocker, sharing stories about how the street looked when she first moved in 60 years ago. "We had block parties every summer," she recalled, accepting a glass of lemonade from Maya. "Everyone would bring out their best dishes, music playing, children everywhere. Then things changed. People got scared, moved away. But this," she gestured at the activity around her, "this feels like those good days coming back." By late afternoon, the new steps were nearly complete. The pressure-treated lumber would last for decades, and the restored railings gleamed with fresh paint. Mrs. Washington's grandson arrived to help with the finishing touches, carefully screwing in the brass house numbers that had adorned the old steps. As the sun began its descent toward the river, Ethan stood back to admire their work. The steps were solid and true, each tread perfectly level. Mrs. Washington walked up and down them with careful steps, nodding in approval. "Just like I remembered," she said, patting the railing. "Only better." People began gathering on their porches as the day's heat softened into evening. The sound of children playing tag wove through the adults' conversations. Someone started playing guitar on a nearby porch, and the music drifted down the street like a gentle current. Ethan sat on Mrs. Washington's bottom step, watching the sun paint the river in shades of gold and pink. Maya joined him, her gardening shoes leaving little dirt prints on the new wood. "Look," she whispered, pointing to a family of ducks paddling along the riverbank. Their quiet movement matched the peaceful mood that had settled over Riverside Avenue. Laughter floated from the Rodriguez porch, where a group had gathered to admire the day's garden progress. The smell of someone's dinner, probably Mrs. Chin's famous pot stickers, wafted through the air. Children's bicycles lay scattered on front lawns, their wheels still spinning slowly from the day's adventures. The street had come alive again, not just with fresh paint and new lumber, but with the spirit Rosemary had fought to protect. Each repaired porch, planted flower, and mended fence was another stitch in the fabric of community she had believed in so fiercely. As the sun sank lower, the river caught its final rays in a brilliant display. Porches up and down Riverside Avenue glowed with warm light as neighbors lingered outdoors, sharing the end of another day of renewal. More laughter drifted through the evening air, accompanied by the gentle slap of river water against the bank and the distant whistle of a train crossing the bridge downstream. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows of First Methodist, painting rainbow patterns across the aged wooden pews. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old hymnals filled the air as people settled into their usual spots, their Sunday best brightened by warm smiles and quiet greetings. Ethan sat in the third row, his pressed shirt a far cry from his old work uniform. The changes in his life over the past months felt almost impossible to grasp. From that desperate morning with the shut-off notice to now having a real home, a secure future, and most importantly, a community that had become family. Maya smoothed her flowered dress and walked to the piano with steady steps, so different from the hesitant little girl who used to peek nervously at the congregation. Her shoulders were straight now, her chin held high as she settled onto the worn piano bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment before she began to play. The first notes of Blessed Assurance filled the sanctuary, strong and clear. Each keystroke carried confidence that hadn't been there before, each chord ringing with purpose. This wasn't just a hymn anymore. It was the song that had helped unlock their miracle, the melody that had revealed the final clues in Rosemary's Clock. Mrs. Thompson, sitting directly behind Ethan, began to sing softly. Her weathered voice carried years of Sunday mornings, of faith tested and renewed. One by one, other voices joined in, creating a gentle wave of sound that wrapped around Maya's playing. Blessed Assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Ethan noticed Ruth Delgado dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, probably remembering those first desperate days when she'd rallied the quilting circle to help. Next to her, Isaiah's deep bass added richness to the hymn, his presence a reminder of the history they'd uncovered together in the church archives. Maya's playing grew stronger with each verse, her small hands moving with certainty across the keys. The morning light caught the silver chain around her neck, a tiny clock pendant, Wally's gift when she'd started helping at his repair classes. The old clockmaker himself sat near the back, his usual gruff expression softened as he listened. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I and my Savior am happy and blessed. The congregation's voices swelled, filling every corner of the sanctuary. Ethan saw Amara wiping tears from her cheeks, probably thinking of that broken clock in her shop that had started it all. Even some of the Riverside Avenue newcomers, who'd moved in after the restoration project began, sang with feeling, caught up in the moment's power. Maya added gentle embellishments to the familiar melody, making it her own while respecting its traditional heart. Her music spoke of more than just notes learned and practiced. It carried echoes of Rosemary's courage, of community restored, of justice finally served with grace. The sound of all these voices joining his daughter's music made Ethan's throat tight with emotion. He remembered Maya practicing this very hymn in their tiny trailer, the keys worn and slightly out of tune. Now she played on this lovingly maintained church piano, her music helping to heal old wounds and build new bridges. As the final verse began, Ethan could almost hear Rosemary's voice among the others, imagining how she must have played this same hymn decades ago, perhaps finding comfort in its promises during those difficult years. Perfect submission, perfect delight. Visions of rapture now burst on my sight. Maya's fingers drew out the last notes with careful reverence, letting them fade naturally into the hushed sanctuary. For a moment, no one moved or spoke, letting the echo of music and memory settle in their hearts. When the last note finally faded away, Ethan reached for Maya's hand and squeezed it gently, his heart so full of pride it felt like it might burst. His daughter's answering smile was brighter than any sunrise over Riverside Avenue. The evening shadows stretched across the living room of their Riverside home as Ethan reached for the mantel clock. His fingers traced the familiar brass edges, still amazed at how this simple timepiece had changed their lives. The wood felt warm beneath his touch, polished smooth by months of daily winding. Through the window, the last rays of sunlight caught the fresh paint on their neighbor's porch, one of many improvements that now brightened their street. The sound of children playing basketball drifted in, accompanied by the steady creak of Mrs. Thompson's porch swing next door. Ethan inserted the key into the clock face with practiced care. 3 full turns, just as Wally had taught him. The mechanism responded with a soft, satisfying click. "Can I help?" Maya asked from the doorway, already in her pajamas, her dark curls damp from the shower. "Come here, sweetie," Ethan smiled, making room for her beside him. "Want to do the pendulum?" Maya nodded eagerly, reaching up to give the brass pendulum a gentle push. The familiar tick-tock filled the room, steady and sure, like a heartbeat. "Remember when we found this at Amara's?" Ethan asked, running his hand over Maya's hair. "It was so dusty," she giggled, "and you didn't want to buy it at first." $2? Ethan shook his head in wonder. "Best $2 I ever spent." Maya leaned against him, both of them watching the pendulum swing. "We were really scared then, weren't we, Dad?" Ethan's throat tightened. Those had been dark days, the shut-off notices, the empty cupboards, the constant fear of losing what little they had. "Yeah, baby, we were. But we're not scared anymore," Maya said with the simple certainty of a child who once again felt secure. "No, we're not." Ethan guided her to the couch, settling into the soft cushions. The room around them held so many symbols of their restored life. Maya's piano in the corner, now properly tuned. Quilts from Ruth's circle draped over chairs. Family photos on the walls, including the treasured picture of Rosemary they'd found in the church archives. "Tell me about that day again," Maya requested, curling up beside him. "When everything started changing." Ethan smiled, remembering. "Well, this old clock slipped right out of my hands while I was cleaning it, made my heart stop for a second, thought I'd broken our only splurge. But instead, the back popped open," Maya finished excitedly. "And there was the key and Grandma Rosemary's letter." "That's right, and then Wally helped us get it working again." Ethan glanced at the clock, its steady ticking a reminder of the clockmaker's kindness. "Remember how his whole face changed when he recognized the maker's mark?" Maya nodded. "He said it was just like the one Grandma Rosemary brought him years ago, and then we found the map. Everything started falling into place after that," Ethan mused. "Isaiah with the church records, Ruth organizing the fundraiser, Amara finding that second clock." He paused, remembering the fear when that clock was stolen, how close they'd come to losing it all. "And then I figured out the hymn code." Maya sat up straighter, pride gleaming in her eyes. Ethan chuckled. "You sure did, sweetheart, playing blessed assurance at just the right moment. Your grandma was clever, hiding those extra documents where only a musician would think to look." They sat quietly for a moment, listening to the clock's steady rhythm. Outside, the street lamps flickered on, casting warm pools of light along the sidewalk where children had played just hours before. "Dad?" Maya's voice was thoughtful. "Do you think Grandma Rosemary would be proud of what we did with everything she saved?" Ethan thought of the Rosemary Hale Foundation, already helping other families find stable housing. He thought of Wally's apprenticeship program at the community center, teaching kids skills that could become careers. He remembered the look on Keen's face when they chose reconciliation over revenge, starting a cycle of healing instead of harm. "Absolutely," he answered without hesitation, giving Maya a gentle squeeze. She hid those papers and deeds because she believed in a better future, one where her family could live without fear, where justice would finally come. "You and me, and everyone who helped us, we made that future real." Maya smiled, snuggling closer. The mantel clock continued its steady song, marking peaceful moments instead of anxious ones. Through the window, Ethan could see lights coming on in homes up and down Riverside Avenue, homes that were being restored, just like the hope his grandmother had preserved all those years ago. They sat together on the couch, father and daughter, surrounded by the gentle ticking that had led them home. The sound seemed to whisper of answered prayers, of community stronger than greed, of a grandmother's love reaching across time to restore what had been lost. The clock struck the hour, its chimes clear and true in the quiet room. Maya yawned, and Ethan pulled her closer, grateful for this moment of perfect peace. The 2 o'clock had indeed unlocked so much more than a fortune. It had unlocked their place in the world, their sense of belonging, their faith in justice and grace. The summer breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming gardenias across the porch as Ethan settled into the old wooden rocking chair. Cicadas hummed their evening chorus from the trees lining Riverside Avenue, their steady rhythm matching the gentle creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. The setting sun painted the river in shades of amber and rose, its surface shimmering like scattered diamonds. He watched as Mrs. Martinez watered her newly planted flower beds across the street, the spray from her hose catching the golden light. She looked up and waved, her smile bright and warm. "Those zinnias are coming in beautifully," she called out, gesturing to the riot of colors bordering Ethan's walkway. "Maya picked those colors," he replied, returning her wave. "She said we needed a rainbow to welcome people." Next door, old Mr. Wilson sat in his usual spot, pipe smoke curling lazily around his head as he nodded a quiet greeting. His porch steps, recently repaired by Keene's crew, no longer sagged. The fresh white paint on his railings gleamed in the fading light. The mantel clock inside chimed 7 times, its clear notes floating through the screen door. Ethan smiled, remembering how that thrift store find had unlocked not just a fortune, but their whole future. The clock's chimes had become the heartbeat of their home, marking each hour with the same steady faithfulness that had preserved Rosemary's secret all those years. From the living room window, Maya's piano practice drifted out. Not scales this time, but the familiar strains of Blessed Assurance. Her touch was confident now, each note ringing true and clear. She'd grown so much in these past months, not just in her playing, but in the way she carried herself. Gone was the worried little girl who used to ask if they'd have to move again. In her place was a child who knew she belonged. The Johnson kids from 3 houses down raced past on their bikes, their laughter echoing off the restored Victorian facades. "Hi, Mr. Cole," they shouted in unison, wobbling as they waved without stopping. Their father jogged behind them, offering a breathless greeting as he passed. Ethan leaned back, taking in the peaceful scene. Young couples strolled along the sidewalk, pushing baby carriages or walking dogs. They paused to admire gardens or chat with neighbors sitting out on their porches. Every few houses, someone was painting a fence or planting flowers, turning the street into a living canvas of renewal. The sound of hammering carried faintly from down the block, where Ruth's son was helping install a wheelchair ramp for elderly Mrs. Thompson. The Rosemary Hale Foundation had approved that grant just last week. Already, similar projects were transforming homes up and down the street, making them accessible for aging residents who'd lived there for decades. A cool breath of air off the river rustled the leaves of the massive oak tree in their front yard. The tree had stood sentinel over this property since before Rosemary's time, its branches now stretching protectively over the renewed neighborhood. Paper lanterns hung from those branches, ready for next weekend's block party, another tradition restored. Inside, Maya hit a wrong note, paused, then started the passage again. Her determination reminded Ethan so much of his grandmother. He could almost hear Rosemary's voice in the evening air, firm and clear, as it had been on that recovered audio reel. "I'm not hiding anymore. I'm preserving." The twilight deepened, turning the river to liquid silver. More porch lights winked on along the street, creating pools of warm welcome. The Martinez children had joined the Johnson kids now, their bikes making lazy circles in the street. Their mothers sat together on the Martinez porch, sharing a pitcher of lemonade and weekend plans. Wally's truck rumbled past, loaded with old clocks for tomorrow's repair class at the community center. He honked twice and lifted his coffee thermos in salute. Through his open window, Ethan caught a glimpse of Isaiah in the passenger seat, likely heading to another archive session. Maya's music shifted to something softer, a lullaby Ethan recognized from his own childhood. The notes floated out like a blessing over the peaceful street. Mrs. Martinez's wind chimes joined in, adding their silver voice to the evening's gentle symphony. Ethan folded his hands in his lap, bowing his head slightly. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying all the gratitude his heart couldn't fully express. "Thank you for the clock that led them here, for the community that had rallied around them, for the justice that had finally come to light, for Maya's music and laughter, for this home that was truly theirs. From inside came the steady, faithful tick of the mantel clock, counting out moments that no longer felt like a burden to be endured, but a gift to be treasured. Each tick spoke of promises kept, wrongs righted, hope restored. The sound merged with the cicada's song, the river's whisper, and Maya's gentle playing, all of it weaving together into the perfect music of a summer evening on Riverside Avenue. The clock ticked on, marking time in a home where every second now held the weight of redemption. Each tick echoed with Rosemary's courage, with answered prayers, with the simple miracle of belonging. Through the open window, Maya's music continued to play, sweet and sure, while the river flowed on, carrying its ancient stories beneath the deepening purple sky. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you thought this was just the beginning, you're right. Click through and see where the story takes you next. If you enjoyed the story of Ethan Cole, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.